Beatrice hated Mondays with a quiet passion. There was something about the sharpness of the morning light and the ticking of clocks that made her chest feel tight. That Monday, though, the sky wept so heavily that she gave in to its mood. Rain traced lazy lines across the cafe windows as she tucked herself into a dim corner with her oversized laptop and an even larger coffee. The place smelled like burnt espresso and wet coats. Comforting, somehow. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but nothing came. She wasn't blocked, just tired. Tired in the way only people pretending to be fine ever are. She wasn't sure when her life had turned into a series of carefully concealed breakdowns. Her career as a lawyer looked pristine from the outside, shiny and untouchable, but on the inside, she felt like a rusted hinge ready to snap. She was scrolling aimlessly through old emails, sipping coffee that had already gone cold, when he stumbled in, quite literally. The door swung open with a gust of wind, and in came a man drenched from head to toe, hair dripping, suit jacket clinging to his shoulders. He muttered an apology as he bumped into a chair and shot the barista a guilty smile, the kind that tried to charm its way out of embarrassment. Beatrice didn't notice him at first. Not really. But when he looked around the room and walked straight toward her table, she felt her body tense before her mind caught up. He was pointing to the empty chair across from her, half laughing. "Sorry," he said, "literally no other seat in this place." His eyes were wide, hopeful, a little desperate. She nodded before she could think. And there it was, the moment she would play on loop in her mind years later. They sat in silence at first, the sound of the rain filling the gaps between glances. He was still catching his breath, unbuttoning his cuffs, muttering something about a meeting he was already too late for. Beatrice noticed his tie was crooked, like he'd knotted it in the dark. She would never have cared about that before, but something about his disheveled state made her feel less alone. He looked like someone who was trying hard and failing just enough to be real. After a few awkward sips of coffee and some mumbled comments about the weather, they slipped into a rhythm. It wasn't flirting, not exactly. More like recognizing each other. Like they'd met in another life and forgotten the details. "Beatrice," she offered when he asked. "Andre," he replied. They shared names like secrets, as if saying them out loud would change something. And maybe it did. They started talking about books, of all things. How she reread The Bell Jar whenever she felt like spiraling. How he never finished any novel he started. She teased him for being a literary quitter. He teased her for being a drama queen. He called her serious, and she laughed in a way that surprised herself. Somewhere between the sarcasm and the truths they weren't afraid to say, a fragile bond began to form. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a crack in the armor. A place where something tender could slip through. Time passed like it didn't matter. She'd come in to distract herself from everything she didn't want to feel, and yet here she was, feeling too much. Andre confessed he hated his job. Marketing, he said, aka convincing people they need stuff they don't. She told him she was a lawyer, but rarely felt like a person. He laughed, then apologized. "No, it's true," she admitted. "I win cases and lose sleep. Guess it evens out." There was a silence after that. Not uncomfortable, just deep. Like both were suddenly aware that this wasn't small talk anymore. It was the beginning of something they didn't know how to name. At one point, Beatrice noticed his shoe was leaking water onto the floor. "You're flooding the cafe," she smirked. "Occupational hazard," he shrugged, grinning. She snapped a photo of the puddle by his foot and said she'd use it as blackmail. He leaned in, not quite close enough to touch, but close enough to change the air between them. "I'm pretty sure you're the most interesting person I've met this year," he said. Her heart gave a stupid flutter she pretended not to feel. "That's a low bar," she said, but her voice was softer than before. It was that kind of day, gray and wet and full of unexpected warmth. When it was time to leave, neither of them moved right away. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but inside, it still felt like a world apart. Beatrice began to gather her things slowly, stalling. Andre did the same. The table between them was covered in empty coffee cups, napkins with doodles, and crumbs of a shared croissant. They stood at the same time, both fumbling for words. She reached for her bag. He looked down at his feet. He started, biting the inside of his cheek. "You wanna, I don't know, keep talking sometime?" Her eyebrows rose, amused. "Are you asking for my number?" He shook his head. "No, I'm asking something else." She blinked. Something else. He chuckled nervously and scratched the back of his neck. I mean, yeah, I know it's weird and sudden and probably stupid, but whatever, I'm gonna say it. He looked her dead in the eye, rainwater still dripping from his collar. Will you be my girlfriend? The words hit the air like static, sharp and awkward and too much all at once. Beatrice burst out laughing, loud, unfiltered, almost like a reflex. The barista looked up from behind the counter, confused. Andre blushed, backing away, already apologizing. No, wait, she said, still laughing but not mocking. I didn't say no. There was something in the way she said it. Half a yes, wrapped in a dare. He tilted his head, smiling now. So, not a no? She shook hers. Not a no, she confirmed. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the moment he saw her. They didn't kiss, didn't hug, just stood there, sharing the silence like an old coat. Beatrice stepped closer, brushing her shoulder against his as they walked out together. She didn't tell him how her heart was racing. He didn't tell her he'd never done anything that bold before. But they both knew something had shifted. Over the next week, they texted almost constantly. At first it was silly stuff. Memes, coffee memes, bad puns. Then came the real things. Andre told her about growing up with just his mom and a parade of stepfathers. She admitted she hadn't spoken to hers in years. They weren't trying to impress each other. That's what made it real. They weren't putting on a show. No polished profiles or curated lives. Just flaws, slowly unwrapped. Do you always say what you think? She asked one night. Only when I'm terrified, he replied. She stared at the message for a long time before typing. Same. One Friday evening, they met again. Same cafe, different mood. She wore red lipstick and pretended she wasn't nervous. He brought a book he said he'd never finish but wanted to own anyway. They talked until closing, then stood outside in the rain like they didn't care. When he leaned in this time, she didn't step back. The kiss was hesitant, new, trembling, like trying to read a language you used to know but had forgotten how to speak. Afterward, they just smiled, the kind of smile that says, okay, we're in this. Whatever this is. And neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. They weren't official. No titles. Just two people orbiting each other with a gravity they didn't understand yet. But Andre kept showing up, in messages, in memories, in the way she started checking the sky to see if it would rain. Beatrice began looking forward to Mondays, just in case. She started listening to the songs he liked, even the ones she swore she hated. He downloaded a legal podcast she recommended, though he fell asleep halfway through every episode. It wasn't love yet, not the kind people write about, but it was something like tenderness. And for two people who had forgotten how to trust, that was enough. Beatrice found herself smiling at random times. In court, on the subway, brushing her teeth. It wasn't that Andre had fixed anything. He hadn't. He was messy and late and had a laugh that sometimes made people stare. But she felt seen, not adored, not idolized. Seen, like someone had reached inside all the static and noise of her life and whispered, I hear you. That kind of thing doesn't happen often. That kind of thing sticks. In the beginning, it felt almost too easy. They fell into each other like waves on a beach, gentle but persistent, crashing and receding only to come together again. They'd stay up talking until 3 a.m., whispering stupid jokes that made them cry with laughter. On weekends, they wandered the city hand in hand, tasting street food, complaining about the heat, but refusing to let go. She liked the way he would tuck her hair behind her ear when she wasn't looking. He loved the way she would fake annoyance at his puns, but secretly collect them like treasures. They slept tangled together even in the summer, bodies slick with sweat, but unwilling to pull away. When she had nightmares, he woke up instantly and stroked her back. When he felt lost, she cupped his face in her palms and told him she saw him, really saw him. For a while, the world felt quiet in their embrace. But love in real life has jagged edges. Andre had a way of needing her that felt flattering until it wasn't. He wanted to know where she was at all times, said it was because he worried. At first she found it cute, reassuring. But then it felt like iron bars closing around her. He would text 3 times if she didn't reply fast enough. He would show up outside her office, unannounced, claiming he missed her face. She didn't want to be unkind, so she didn't tell him to stop at first. She just smiled, even when her chest went tight. She told herself it was okay to be needed. She liked the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing holding him together. But deep down she knew she was afraid. Afraid of what he might do if she ever told him no. Beatrice had her own demons. One she'd learned to hide behind sarcasm and long hours at work. She hated being vulnerable, equated it with weakness. When they fought, she would shut down, cross her arms, go silent, refuse to explain why she was angry. Andre, frantic to fix things, would grow louder, more desperate. He accused her of shutting him out on purpose. She accused him of not listening. The words got ugly sometimes. She'd throw his insecurities back at him like knives. He'd call her cold, say she didn't know how to love anyone. Afterward, they'd both cry, hating themselves more than each other. Then they'd apologize in the dark, whispering "I'm sorry" into each other's skin. But the wounds never closed properly. They just learned to bleed quietly. One night the fight was worse than usual. She'd spend hours ignoring his texts because she needed space to think. When she got home, he was waiting outside her building, pacing like an animal in a cage. She could see the hurt on his face before he spoke. "Where were you?" he demanded, voice shaking. She sighed, exhausted. "I needed time." That wasn't good enough for him. "With who?" he asked. The question landed like an insult, burning hot. She felt something snap. "Jesus, Andre, I can't do this," she said, pushing past him. He grabbed her wrist, gently, but firmly enough to make her stop. "Don't walk away from me," he pleaded, voice cracking. She yanked free and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. He didn't call the next day, or the one after. Beatrice sat on her living room floor, hugging her knees, feeling hollow. She stared at the door like she could will him to knock. She replayed the fight over and over, searching for the moment she could have stopped it from going so wrong. When she finally slept, she dreamed of the cafe where they met, the rain tapping on the glass like it was trying to apologize. At work, she pretended nothing was wrong, her voice crisp in meetings, her hair perfectly tied back. But every time her phone lit up, hope would sputter to life and die again. She typed out messages she didn't send. "Come back. I'm sorry too. I miss you." Then she'd delete them, because she didn't know how to forgive him for making her feel small. She didn't know how to forgive herself for leaving. Andre spent those days lost, wandering the city without purpose. He went to work, but didn't really work. He ordered coffee he didn't drink, let it go cold in his hands. Friends asked if he was okay, and he lied badly. He kept checking his phone too, willing her to message first. He told himself he wouldn't be the one to break this time. But he hated the silence. Hated the way it made him think about every fucked up thing he'd said to her. He replayed her face when she told him she couldn't do it anymore. How tired she'd looked. He felt ashamed. He wasn't sure if he hated her or himself more. Mostly himself, because he knew the truth. He was afraid of losing her so badly he'd squeezed too tight, and now she was gone. Eventually, he showed up at her door again. It was raining, because of course it was. He was soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, suit jacket clinging to him like regret. When she opened the door, she just stared at him for a long time. He tried to smile, but it fell apart halfway. "Hi," he managed. She didn't say anything. Her eyes were puffy. She looked like she hadn't slept. He shoved his hands in his pockets like they might keep him from shaking. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice small. She moved aside without a word. He stepped in, dripping water onto her floor. The silence between them felt heavy enough to crack the walls. He didn't try to hug her right away. Didn't touch her at all. Just stood there, breathing hard, trying to keep it together. She watched him like she was seeing a ghost. Finally, he blurted it out. "Will you be my girlfriend again?" The words tumbled out clumsy, desperate, raw. She laughed. Not the bright, delighted laugh from the cafe. A broken sound that caught in her throat. "You're an idiot," she whispered, voice shaking. He nodded, eyes glistening. "Yeah, I know." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. He wanted to hold her, but didn't dare. He didn't want to make it worse. So he just waited. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were wet, but her expression softer. She took one small step toward him. He didn't move. "Say it again," she said. His brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" She took another shaky breath. "Ask me again." He swallowed hard, chest rising and falling. "Beatrice, will you be my girlfriend?" She let out a breath that sounded like relief and despair all at once. Then she launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his neck. He wrapped his arms around her like he was trying to hold the whole world together. They stood there for a long time, shaking, crying, clutching each other like lifelines. For a while after that, things really did get better. They tried. God, they tried so hard. He promised to give her space when she needed it. She promised to talk instead of shutting down. They cooked meals together and watched terrible movies just to laugh at them. They tried to replace the old, cruel words with gentle ones. They made lists of places they wanted to travel. She let him pick the music on car rides even when it was awful. He surprised her with flowers on a random Tuesday. They started to believe maybe love really could heal what it broke. They held each other tighter in bed, as if daring the world to come between them again. But love doesn't erase scars. Old wounds itch even when they're closed. One night, lying in bed, Andre glanced at her phone lighting up. She was half asleep, mumbling something about, "It's nothing." He saw a message from someone he didn't recognize. She tried to explain it was an ex, just being friendly, no big deal. But something ugly and old unfurled in his chest. The panic, the certainty that he'd be left behind. He heard himself calling her a liar before he even meant to. She sat up, voice cold and clipped, telling him to fuck off if he didn't trust her. It spiraled so fast neither knew how to stop it. Old fears roaring back like they'd just been waiting. The words were worse this time. He called her manipulative. She called him pathetic. He said she'd always leave eventually. She screamed that he was suffocating her on purpose. Tears blurred everything. Neither could remember who started yelling first. In the end, she grabbed her keys and walked out. He sat on the floor of their bedroom, heart pounding, knowing he'd fucked up beyond fixing. She spent the night at a friend's place, phone off, too numb to cry. When she finally turned it on, there were dozens of messages, some apologizing, some angry, all desperate. She didn't read them all. She just stared at the last one. "Please, don't leave me." They tried one more time. One final dinner where they sat across from each other, exhausted and fragile, trying to find the words. They held hands on the table, but let go too easily. She cried quietly while he rubbed at his eyes until they were raw. They both said sorry until the word lost all meaning. He promised he'd change. She promised she'd try to believe him, but neither sounded convinced. When they hugged goodbye, it felt like mourning, like burying something still half alive. She kissed his cheek, whispering, "I love you," in a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. He didn't say it back until she was already gone. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them felt like a living thing. Beatrice kept busy to keep from thinking. She worked late, took on projects no one wanted, stayed out until the bars closed. She laughed too loudly with friends who didn't know what she'd lost. But when she got home, she'd sit on the edge of her bed, staring at the door like it might open. She didn't delete their photos. Couldn't. She'd scroll through them at 2 a.m., finger hovering over his smile. Sometimes she'd whisper, "I love you," to the empty room, as if he might hear it somewhere. Other nights, she didn't let herself cry at all, fearing if she started she'd never stop. Andre was no better. He told everyone he was fine, even made jokes about being single again. But the apartment felt like a mausoleum. He kept seeing her hair ties in the bathroom, her mug on the shelf. He tried to throw them away once, but sat on the floor clutching them, sobbing until he was sick. He stopped cooking, ordered greasy takeout he barely touched. On weekends, he slept until the afternoon, waking to the stale smell of old arguments. He went to their cafe once, sat in their spot, waited to see if she'd show up by some miracle. When she didn't, he told the server he wasn't hungry after all, walked home in the rain. They both thought about reaching out. She'd type his name into her phone and then backspace it slowly. He'd stare at her contact picture, thumb hovering over call. But they remembered the fights, the way they could reduce each other to raw nerves with a single word. They were both terrified of trying again, only to fail worse. Because love had started as salvation, but ended like a curse. She didn't want to hate him. He didn't want to hurt her anymore. So they both did the hardest thing they knew how to do. Nothing. They chose silence over more scars. Even though it hurt like hell. One night, months later, she dreamed of him. It wasn't a fight this time. They were on that street where the vendors sold pastillas, sharing one and complaining about the grease. He kissed powdered sugar off her cheek. She woke up crying, pillow soaked. She sat in the dark wondering if he ever dreamed of her too. She hated herself for wanting to know. She poured a drink she didn't need, stared at the window until the city lights blurred. She whispered his name, so quietly it might have been a prayer. Then she wiped her eyes and told herself to get up, to keep going. Because that's what people do, even when their hearts are broken. Andre had his own quiet breakdowns. He'd see someone with her hair color on the bus and feel his stomach flip, hear her favorite song in a store and have to leave before he lost it. He told friends he was over it, but the lie tasted like blood. He started therapy, reluctantly at first. Told the counselor he didn't want to talk about some girl. By the third session, he couldn't stop. He admitted he didn't know how to be alone, that he'd wanted her so badly he didn't care if it hurt her. He cried more than he ever thought he would in front of another human being. But he kept going back, because he wanted to be better, even if it was too late for them. Beatrice tried therapy too, after much convincing from a friend. She hated every second of it at first. Hated admitting she was sad, that she missed him, that she missed herself when she was with him. She talked about the nights she couldn't sleep, about the fights she started on purpose, about how she'd learned to shut down before anyone could hurt her. Her therapist didn't judge, just asked, gently, if maybe she'd been hurting both of them by refusing to be seen. She didn't have an answer, but she kept going, week after week, learning how to be honest, even when it stung. Time didn't heal everything. That was the worst part. It softened the edges of the memories, but didn't erase them. She still thought of him when she heard rain on glass. He still looked for her in crowded rooms, even when he told himself to stop. They both dated other people eventually. Awkward first dates with forced laughter. Tender attempts that ended kindly but firmly. Because neither was ready to give their heart away again. Not yet. They compared everyone to each other, which wasn't fair to anyone. They both knew it. But old love leaves a mark you can't wash out. It stains you in places no one else can see. One day they ran into each other by accident. A bookstore downtown. She was thumbing through a novel she wouldn't buy. He was in the travel section, pretending he was brave enough to go somewhere new. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to hold its breath. For a second it felt like no time had passed at all. She smiled first. Small. Careful. He smiled back, even though it hurt. They stood there, inches apart, neither knowing what to say. The silence wasn't angry this time. Just sad. Just real. They both knew too much to lie. So they didn't. They just let the quiet say everything. He asked how she was. She told him the truth. Better. Healing. Lonely sometimes, but learning. She asked him the same. He shrugged. Getting there. They both laughed, soft and rueful. They didn't apologize. Didn't rehash the past. They didn't say they missed each other, even though it was obvious. He asked if she wanted coffee. She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't think I should. He nodded, looking down at his shoes. Yeah, me neither. They stood there for another moment, neither wanting to be the one to walk away. But they both knew they had to. Finally, she whispered, take care. He swallowed hard. You too. When she left the store, she didn't cry. She felt the tears threaten but blinked them back. She walked slowly, deliberately, breathing in the city air like she needed it to stay standing. She told herself this was right. That love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means letting go so you don't destroy each other. She thought of his face in the store, the way he tried to smile. She hoped he'd find someone who could love him the way she couldn't. Someone who wouldn't be afraid of needing him. She knew she wasn't that person, and that knowledge ached, but it also felt like mercy. Andre watched her walk away through the window. He pressed his hand to the glass like a child. He didn't call after her, didn't chase. He told himself he wouldn't be that man anymore. He let himself hurt, really hurt. He stood there until the clerk asked if he was okay. He lied, said he was fine, paid for a book he wouldn't read, walked out into the afternoon light squinting against the sun. He wondered if she was looking back. She wasn't. That was good. That was healthy. That was the right thing, even if it felt like dying. He went home and sat on the couch in the dark, listened to the rain on the windows, remembered the way she used to hum when she was thinking. He closed his eyes and let the memories come. Didn't fight them this time. He cried until it felt like he couldn't breathe. Then he wiped his face and turned on the lamp, picked up a notebook and wrote for the first time in months. He wrote about her, about them, about everything he'd done wrong. He didn't know if he'd ever show anyone, but it felt like something was leaving his body, something he'd been too afraid to let go of. Beatrice went home to her apartment that no longer smelled like him. She kicked off her shoes, poured tea instead of whiskey. She curled up on the couch with a blanket she'd bought to replace the one he'd taken when he left. She let herself remember the good things. The way he held her when she cried. The terrible jokes that made her groan and smile anyway. The way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question. She cried quietly. Not the desperate, heaving sobs of before, just tears that felt clean, like rinsing out an old wound so it could finally close. In the weeks that followed, they didn't see each other again, but they thought about that meeting often. He would smile when he remembered how she'd said, "Take care." She would sigh when she remembered his crooked, sad grin. Neither of them regretted loving each other. They regretted not knowing how to love better. But regret isn't the same as hate. They both wanted the other to be happy, even if it wasn't with them. That was the truth they'd never been able to say when they were together. It was easier now, in the silence, in the distance that no longer felt like punishment, but like grace. Eventually, she really did stop checking her phone at night. He stopped waiting for her in his dreams. They both kept going. She took that trip she'd always talked about. He went back to school. They fell in love again, but carefully this time, with people who fit them in new ways. People who didn't mind their old scars. They never forgot each other. How could they? But the memories softened, became lessons instead of weights. When friends asked about old loves, they didn't lie. They said, "I love them. It just didn't work." And they meant it, without bitterness, without shame. Years later, they passed each other on the street. Older, wiser, with new loves by their sides. Their eyes met, and there was recognition, but no ache. They both smiled, truly smiled. She gave a little wave. He tipped an imaginary hat, making her laugh. Then they kept walking. Neither looked back. They didn't need to. The past was a place they'd visited, not where they lived anymore. They carried it with them, but lightly, because they'd learned the hardest, truest lesson of all. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone you love is let them go.